Okay, this is going to be my video critique of the sample project. You're welcome to make your own video critique, or you can write it on paper. Your choice is yours. This is the rubric. You should have a copy of it. If not, make sure you get it off the internet, off of Schoology. But I'm just going to go through it, and I'm going to talk about each one of these back on the project that you've already seen. So first issue is you want to include a discussion about which stats were used correctly to support the main argument. So I'm going to go back through it, and when you watch this presentation, these stats were used correctly because this was the data. It is totaled correctly. It's totaled left and right, and then it has one grand total here that matches. These were correctly changed to percents, and it was used correctly. These are indeed the correct totals. And then these two totals right here were taken correctly to produce the pie chart. And if you look back here, the daily totals were correctly used to make the box and whiskers plot. So all of those things were correctly used. I liked the fact that there's a variety of different things. There's a couple tables here. There's a pie chart. There's a side-by-side bar graph. This one in particular, I think, is easy to see the variance over the days. That this particular day, there was a lot more difference between the people that sped up and slowed down than the other days. But this easily shows us the overall total. So those are the things I liked. Let's go back to the other one. Okay, so the next thing that we need to talk about is a discussion about which stats were used incorrectly to support the main argument. So there wasn't a lot that was used incorrectly, but there is some stuff that was used poorly, particularly when it has to do with the conclusion. The conclusion here says most people sped up at the yellow light than slowed down. And although clearly, based on this one, more people did speed up than slow down, if you look here, this is only over 3 days. And if I look at this particular day, there's a big difference in these other days. So this particular day is skewing your data. These other days are not nearly as differentiated as this particular day is. And then my next question is, well, which days? Because maybe if we looked at an entire week, you would see days where it's flip-flopped. So yes, it does support it, but I think it supports it poorly. And the same thing is here. This is true for what we have, but I think it could have gone a lot better if there was just more data. So I think that's a big weakness of using these statistics the way they're used. So let's go back to the rubric. So what was incorrect? Just the data that was used was poorly used, even though it was mathematically correct. So for suggestions to make the project better, and it says that you need to offer multiple suggestions, so that's more than 2. So my first suggestion is when you start, let's get a lot more data. Okay, this is only 3 days. You gotta have a minimum of at least 7 days. You just have to have a lot more data. And the other thing is, this is one single traffic light in one particular city. It's really difficult to take that and then make this conclusion, this very, very, very general conclusion that's implying for everywhere. So you get a couple choices here to make it better. One is change the conclusion. Instead of saying in general, you could say for a particular city, whichever city you're doing the data for. And if there's more than one traffic light, you probably should take some data at more than one traffic light to get better sense. So maybe let's say you're in a bigger city and there's hundreds of traffic lights, number them all, and then use a random number generator to pick, say, 5 of them, and go to those particular 5 that the random number generator came up with, and do those for a week. And you want to spread it out. You don't want to just do it all in, say, the spring or the fall, because that also might change. So you got to really spread it out. So there's a lot of different things that you need to be looking at to make a good project. So that was offers for improvement. And then the last section talks about bias. So you want to talk about the bias that you see. You can either agree with what's already there and explain why that worked, or you can offer some other suggestions, or you can even do both. And I'm going to actually do both. So the 2 things I talked about with bias were just choosing a random corner. Well, we've already know that that's by definition bias, so this is absolutely correct. And the reason this is bias is because anytime you have a survey of convenience, there's bias involved because you're just looking at what's nearby. And you want to make sure it's random. And the only way to truly make sure it's random is to use something like a random number generator. or you can just, tally everything off and then count to the, say, 10th one and just look at every 10th one. But just picking the whatever happens to be nearby is always creating bias. And clearly this data set is way, 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 way too small to be accurate without having a lot more randomization to it. Some other bias that was in is I picked a particular street light. That one may or may not represent everything, so there's bias in there because of the street light I picked. The sample size has some bias. The days have bias. I picked these particular 3 days. Clearly, this one is different than the other two, so I don't know if these were the weekend days and this was the weekday, maybe vice versa. Maybe this is during rush hour and these are not. I mean, all of those things have some bias to them. So when I pick those, absolutely affects the data. So you got to be careful with all of that. So there's some other bias in there. So actually there's quite a bit of bias. And the consequence of all that bias is this conclusion is pretty much meaningless, even though the data that I'm showing you supports that conclusion. There's so much bias in it. This is absolutely meaningless conclusion. You can actually draw absolutely no conclusions from the survey that I did. So if you are going to do a survey like this, there's a lot to clean up because this is not a particularly very good one. So that would be the 4 points. If you can do all 4 points, then you get a 4 out of 4. If you got 3 of them, obviously you'd be a 3 out of 4. So make sure you include all of these. And if you don't have a copy of the rubric, make sure you get them. If you have any questions, please make sure you ask.